Okay, the high school public forum, we have on the affirmative side, that's speaking second. From KMLA, the first speaker is Jinwon Park. Second speaker, Sebin An. On the negative side, going first, our first speaker is Dongju Lee. Our second speaker, Christopher Kim from Hanguk Academy of Foreign Studies. The resolution for public forum again is resolved. There ought to be more emphasis on liberal arts education over math and sciences education in Asia. Judges, whenever you guys are ready, you guys can indicate to the students.
Okay, first speaker, are you ready?
Yes. Maybe. Mr. and Madam Speaker, education is a public initiative, and when we're going to prioritize one thing over the other, and when we're going to engage in a trade-off and allocate our limited resources toward liberal arts education, we have to consider the backlashes. And thinking of the interests of our society and of the individuals, we believe that math and science education is not something to sacrifice because it brings us tangible and unique benefits. It's not simply the affirmative side's burden to explain to us why liberal arts education is beneficial. They have a burden to explain to us why liberal arts education is lacking in the status quo and how that justifies reducing math and science education. Because we have limited resources, limited class time, and limited teachers. And when we're going to put more emphasis on liberal arts education, that means that we have to reduce our focus on class time in math and science education. And we will explain to you why that should not happen in the status quo, especially under the context of Asia. Now, two arguments to explain this. First of all, we'll talk about the unique merits and necessity of math and science education, especially under the context of Asia. And second of all, we'll talk about how liberal arts education has its alternatives, while math and science education does not. Now, moving on to our first argument. Our first subpoint is about the individual level. An OECD study done in 2012 shows a very strong correlation between science and math education and performances in problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. All of these skills are crucial for an individual's pursuit of their career, and we believe that math and sciences basically build up the fundamental abilities for an individual to be a successful person in the future. Now, our second subpoint, the more important and urgent point, is about the society's need for math and science education. According to a study conducted by Manpower, a human resource consulting firm, there is a global trend showing a shortage of skilled laborers and technicians. And this trend is something more prevalent in Asia. For example, top 3 occupations that are in most in shortage in Japan are technicians, skilled trade workers, and engineers. If you look at the case of India, there are IT staff and engineers. In 2020, the global shortage of skilled workers is estimated to be up to 85 million people. And this is all because of factors like an aging society and an increasing demand, a growing demand of high-tech industries and IT industries. Ladies and gentlemen, we see an absolute need and demand for more students that come from STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, this is especially true because we're debating under the context of Asia. And many countries in Asia are in the developing stage and are in an imminent need of industrialization. Because we're not only talking about countries like Korea or Japan, we're also talking about those countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Indonesia. These countries need more high-quality engineers and technicians. On top of that, WHO studies show that there is a medical workforce crisis in Asia, where there is a shortage of doctors and nurses in the status quo. So, as we can see, we believe that in the context of Asia especially, math and science education is crucial and something that we should not reduce. So moving on to our second argument. Liberal arts education has various alternatives to it. The benefits that come from liberal arts education can be enjoyed in various typical human experiences, like reading books. You can read Huckleberry Finn by yourself, you can read social studies books or history books by yourself, but you can't really study advanced physics AP by yourself without any kind of professional guidance. So overall, we see an abundant amount of opportunities to be exposed to liberal arts, and what you learn in liberal arts education is not specific to the school environment. However, you can't study math and science education by yourself because it requires professional guidance. So school education here plays a more crucial role. This is why we believe it's unreasonable to sacrifice math and science education to focus more on liberal arts. Moreover, we believe that because of this trade-off, there will be an increased polarization of educational opportunities. People who are wealthy enough to afford private education and study advanced math and science get to do so, while those who aren't as fortunate are excluded from that opportunity because basically the school suddenly decided to put more time in poetry and literature. Those 2 reasons are why we believe we are very proud to oppose the motion. Thank you.
The function of education, ladies and gentlemen, is to make you a better cultured person. True education is concerned not only with practical goals, but also with humanistic values. Excessive emphasis on math and sciences in Asia is hindering such purpose, and in order to achieve the real goal of education, we stand here for more emphasis of liberal arts education than math and sciences in Asia. First and foremost, we will define the motion. Now, number 1, more emphasis means increasing the emphasis than the status quo to the extent that it is equal with the emphasis with math and sciences. And liberal arts and math and sciences have different kinds of benefits, ladies and gentlemen, and that is the reason why we will balance the investment in both fields. This way, we can maximize the benefits of diverse fields in diverse aspects. And number 2, liberal arts education means non-major level selective classes, in other words, general education classes, including but not limited to philosophy, literature, and history. Contention 1, necessity. The resolution is essential as the best solution of the 2 significant problems that are taking place in the status quo. Subpoint 1, to attain the true purpose of technological development. Asia has been recently pouring efforts for technological development, but here's a fundamental question. What is the purpose of such technological development? It is for the humans to live a better life, because in the end, it is the humans who will use that technology. The improvement needs studies about humans' history, thoughts, behaviors. And ladies and gentlemen, we see that liberal art is all about these humanistic values. Therefore, technology is not separated with liberal arts, but we believe that they're connected together. That is why Steve Jobs had emphasized liberal arts by saying, we're not just a tech company. It's the marriage of that plus the humanities and the liberal art that distinguishes us. Without enough emphasis on liberal arts. Without enough understanding about humans, technology cannot fully develop. But the problem is the value of liberal arts is being neglected while there's an excessive emphasis only on math and sciences. This means Asia is forgetting about the most important part of technological development. Technology cannot develop without its basis, Mr. and Madam Speakers. Subpoint 2, to respect the freedom of choices. Too much emphasis only on math and sciences is neglecting the freedom of choices for the students. As Asian education continues being shifted to the extreme, it creates a false social perception that math and sciences are superior to liberal arts. Therefore, elite students will choose math and sciences over any other curriculums to receive social recognition, and this makes them to have a forced choice to get an upper hand. Now, what you need to remember, Mr. and Madam Speaker, is that among these students who choose math and sciences over liberal arts, there are students who might be interested in, or there might be students who are talented in liberal arts, but we're not even giving them the chances to realize their potential and to further develop their talents, but instead we're simply pressuring and oppressing their own talent to focus on math and sciences because of the social perception that is being biased to math and sciences. Now, we say that this is a clear problem in the status quo that we have identified, which provides us a justification to pass this resolution. Contention 2, benefits. We believe that more emphasis, balanced education between math and sciences and liberal arts is going to open more variety of career choices. Although university students dream of having careers in the future, only some of them are able to actually have that job. This means the rest of them should either find a new job or do nothing. But even if, in the best scenario, every student has a job that they have chosen, which is almost impossible, we see that this situation is problematic as well. Why? Because the choices they have made are unfair in the first place because they're uninformed choices. They have been educated biased to math and sciences for such a long time, which restricts them from being aware of their potential talents in liberal arts or different kinds of careers related to such fields. Now, therefore, we think it is important to prepare for work in various sectors and be aware of different kinds of career choices. More emphasis on liberal arts education will help them do this because general education classes cover a wider range of subjects and also enables them to discover their hidden talents, in the end giving them more options for their future. So ladies and gentlemen, we believe that we need a change in educational paradigm and there is a problem. And we believe that today we're living in this status quo where there is a too significant problem of technological development without any fundamental basis, and also the students receiving social oppression, the discriminatory social perception that math and sciences are superior to liberal arts. And that is the reason why we urge you to propose. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Zach? Proceed. Go ahead.
Can we read? So you said your model in saying that, in translating that we should put more emphasis on liberal arts education over math and science education, as saying that you will make it balanced. Don't you think that that's away from the spirit of the debate? And first of all, saying that going against the motion directly saying that you're going to put more emphasis over math and science education, and also that in the status quo we already have 50 to 50 equal proportionate class hours for math and science education and liberal arts education.
Yes, we get your point, but we believe that in the status quo, although the time might be the same, what we're trying to fix is not only the educational time itself, but about the educational social perception that we have about education. We believe that because of the social perception and the message that is too much biased to math and sciences, we're trying to fix that paradigm by actually putting more emphasis on liberal arts than the status quo to make it balanced. What you are saying is that math and sciences have unique benefits, and what we are opposing to is that since liberal arts also have its unique benefits, we believe that that is why we're trying to make balanced education.
First of all, under all models,
question, please.
Okay.
Now you have told what do you think about these students who are making forced choices because of the social perception and those who cannot find their own potential?
First of all, I don't get your standard saying that it's a forced choice. No choice is forced upon those individuals. If their choices are facilitated by various factors, in which saying that they will get a better job opportunity when they go to STEM industries, because there is an absolute more amount of job opportunities for them. Let me answer your question. Then we believe that that's totally fine, because if they think that they get a better chance to get a job, then they can go to those go to those education, and I believe that if that's beneficial for the individual. Now let me ask you a question. You say that you talked about cases like Apple. You said that we need a crossroad of liberal arts and math and science education. We totally agree. But first of all, under all model, we're not abandoning liberal arts education. We think that we're doing a totally fine job. Under an OECD study done by PISA, an academic evaluation study upon most countries worldwide, it turned out that among the top 10 countries that ranked high in critical reading and writing, that among those 10 countries, 5 countries were nations like Japan, China, Singapore, and Korea. 5 countries were Asian countries. Don't you think that we're already doing a great job? Where's your basis in saying that there's a lack of liberal arts education in the status
As
quo?
we were saying, in case of college education, for example, in South Korea, what we were talking about is general education classes. And since people are having too much major on math and sciences, we believe that those kinds of general education, such as philosophy or ethics, is currently lacking in the college education, which is changing the social perception that math and sciences are comparatively superior, which is going to affect the choices of the
We
individual.
don't think that's not leads to the perception that math and science is more superior. We believe that the reason why more people go to math and science education in public schools is because, first of all, there are much less liberal arts universities in the status quo. There are much less demand in the industry for liberal arts education, and that people actually get more jobs when they go to that education. Don't you think that it's natural when everybody goes to STEM education because there are more job opportunities and there are more
That
colleges that they
perception
can go to?
itself is wrong, what we're trying to fix.
So do you have time or we'll proceed to the others?
Yes, sir.
Sure. Go ahead.
Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of this House. In order for Team Proposition to take this debate home, it's not enough for them to say that liberal arts education is very beneficial and important. Because when it comes to education, we told you that there are limited resources, limited class hours, and limited teachers. So when they're putting an emphasis on a certain subject, they have to acknowledge the fact that that means a less emphasis on other subjects like STEM education. But they have to prove to us why this sacrifice is justified in the first place. Now, as the second opposition speaker, now I'd like to respond to some of the points raised by Team Proposition. Now, first of all, we believe that their characterization of the status quo was faulty from the start. Now, they said that right now we have an imbalance of an education and an overly excessive emphasis on STEM education. However, in the status quo in public education, we see that we already provide equal hours of education for both STEM subjects and also subjects like history or literature. So they have to prove to us why there's a specific lack in the status quo for liberal arts education in the first place. And then they tried to tell us about how about the freedom of education and how the core values of education is to make you into a better cultured person. Now to this we have two responses. First of all, we say that they haven't proved to us why the current status, the educational system right now, fails to do that job. Because according to a PISA 2012 study that actually recorded the test for students all around the world, among the top 10 nations that scored in the reading and critical reading and writing section, 5 nations were out of Asia. So we can see that actually Asian students are also excelling in those subjects of liberal arts education. They cannot prove that lack in the status quo. And our second response is that, of course, liberal arts education is important for individual development and you to become a cultured person. However, STEM education is also equally important. We told you that according to the OECD 2012 study, there's a strong correlation between science and math education and performances in problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. So even if liberal arts education is very important, we cannot reduce the amount and the emphasis on STEM education because those are also necessary for individual development. And then they tried to tell us about how technology is developing, however liberal arts education is the basis of technology. We absolutely agree that of course it is hand in hand, that we should also, we absolutely agree that liberal arts education is necessary for technology development. That's exactly why we're saying that the status quo is fine. Because we see in public schools, we give education also on technology and STEM education, but also equally a proportional amount for the history and literature classes. So we don't really see why there's a lack in the status quo. And then they talked about the freedom of choice, how right now we have a forced choice of students, selecting STEM careers. To this we have 3 responses. First of all, we don't really see why this is bad in the first place, because we think that people's actions and people's choices have to reflect market demand. We told you how there's currently a shortage in STEM workers, and obviously more companies want students from STEM education backgrounds. So it is natural for people to follow the market demand, and in order for them to want to get jobs, they make the choices that'll get them the best opportunities. Our second response is that we don't really think that this is a forced choice in the first place, because they're simply saying that as if public education brainwashes you and spoon feeds you only for STEM education, but that's simply not true. In public education, we have equal hours of both STEM subjects, but also literature and history classes. So we don't really see that this is a forced choice in the first place. If you want to choose a liberal arts college, then you can do that if you want to. It's not a forced choice in the first place. And the third response is that their solution won't actually solve this problem anyway, because their problem analysis was that about the wrong social perception too much towards science and math education. But if the social perception is the problem, how is simply increasing poetry classes going to suddenly solve that social perception? The social perception is based upon market demand because companies want STEM workers. So just because they increase poetry and literature classes, that's not going to change that social perception anyway. So because first of all, they couldn't prove to us why there's a specific lack in the status quo of liberal arts education in Asia. And secondly, they could not prove to us why it is enough to justify, to sacrifice our STEM education when the market actually requires more STEM workers. We told you how there's a shortage in those technicians and engineers in many developing countries. They cannot take this debate home.
So, Mr. Madden speakers, the opposition also, we must have to clarify the status quo in this situation. The government also understands the fact that the status quo, the study hours are equal for liberal arts and math and science in the curriculum. But we're not talking about the curriculum today. We're talking about the social perception itself that emphasizes math and sciences over liberal arts, which influences these students to choose these kind of majors over liberal arts. And we think that this kind of perception that marginalizes liberal arts itself is detrimental to society, and therefore that is why we're proud to propose. Now, before I move on to rebutting the opposition case, I'd first like to talk about what they said about our case. Now, regarding the first argument of justification in the status quo, they told us today with 2 points. Like, first of all, about the technology plus human studies. They said that the status quo is fine and all blah, 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 blah. However, we clearly see that there's a discrepancy between the number of majors of math and sciences and liberal arts, now how students choose math and sciences over human studies, and therefore there is a discrepancy when there should be a complete balance between the two studies, for these actual two studies to actually go together and actually harmonize, so actually to even get more technological development as opposition so wants to do so. And we look at the second subpoint about forced choices. They simply said it's not forced, it's just facilitated by social aspects. We think that's a complete misrepresentation of society. Why? Because we think that these students should be able to choose their career based on their wants and their aptitudes, and not be forced by social perception that says that of course this kind of career is better for you. Of course this career should be your choice if you are an intelligent student. We think that this kind of social forcing movement itself is detrimental to these students' careers and their own positive futures. And also they said that by increasing poetry classes, we're not solving the actual problem. However, we have never said that we're going to solve this problem by increasing poetry classes, but by the change of social perception itself in the long term, we think that the solution can be actually a very good one to solve the kind of problem in the status quo. Now let's move on to what they told us about their case. And their first argument regarding necessity and merits. Now, the first subpoint about the individual level and creativity is just as they said in their second argument, there are various alternatives for creativity in general, not just liberal arts, but everyday experiences can also substitute of creativity according to their own logic. And their second subpoint regarding the society's need, they talked about how there's a shortage in skilled science and math technology majors. And we think that's a complete misrepresentation of the status quo again. Why? Because we can clearly see in the status quo that Asia is a very high-tech country, high-tech nations like Korea, Japan, and China, and India. We're talking about these nations to actually rule the IT world. And they just come up today and say that of course they're not developed in science and math. What are they talking about? And also, you can clearly also see that in poor countries, it's actually even more beneficial for them to study human studies. Why? Because it's obviously going to provide them a blue ocean, which the developed nations have not actually investigated yet, and therefore be able to actually investigate what kind of necessities humans have in today's society, what humans need and what humans want, what is the basic personality of these humans. And this can all be actually done by liberal arts study, and simply not by technology, because the technology market is already being taken up by the developed nations. Now let's move on to their last argument regarding the alternatives. Now, they told us today that the benefits of liberal arts, of course, they can be substituted by typical human activities, and they just magnify how hard math and sciences is by saying advanced physics AP class is so difficult. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that this is terribly wrong for for a multitude of reasons. Now, first of all, is that really likely? Where according to their case, students love math and sciences so much that their time is devoted to that. So actually, after school, do you think that they're possibly going to read books, or they're going to solve science and math questions? According to their paradigm, I think that the latter is much more likely. Second of all, we think that even if they do actually read books and do actually do liberal arts in their homes, it's unlikely they're going to be actually reading the quality of liberal arts that are being provided, that could be provided by general arts, by at school age. There is a clear difference between the quality of Twilight, the quality of Atlas Shrugged. And we think that for these reasons, because they simply misanalyzed the status quo, the government side takes the debate home today. Thank you.
Do you guys need prep time, or would you like to proceed to the next slide?
Okay, so you talked about how there should be a complete balance of the measures that people take, but don't you think that people's choice reflects market demand?
Of course they should. However, we think that in the status quo, that kind of demand is actually influencing these students over all other aspects. And even if these students do have the aptitude and do have the interest in these kind of liberal arts, they are being forced by society to actually choose a certain path. And we think that that itself is an unjustifiable phenomenon in society.
Ma'am, how is choosing a career, how is choosing a major that will get you the best job, how is that a forced choice?
We think that the selection in the job market should be based on very different aspects. And we think that, of course, it does include the consideration of the job market. But in society, we think that that job market is not fair. Why? Because we think that this job market does not marginalize liberal arts, does not actually respect the career of liberal arts. And we think in this situation, it's impossible for these students to actually pursue a career as they want to. And we think that that itself is an unjustified situation. May I ask you a question now, please?
Sure.
Thank you. So what do you think about the disparateness in the technology and human studies according to our first self point?
Excuse me?
In the first argument, the first self point, we talked about how there's a disparity between the technology development and human studies development, and how they should go together to actually promote the technological development as you actually saw.
Well, first of all, we think that in a public education stage, there is already equal proportion of both subjects. However, in actual society, we think that we cannot actually control what kind of proportion we have, because obviously companies choose what kind of people they want, and in this status quo, we see that there's a shortage of technicians and engineers.
So are you saying that if there's a problem in this status quo, a problem in society, it should just fit into those wrong social subjects?
Why? So having a shortage of technicians, why is that a problem in the first place? If the IT industry and the new emerging industry requires more STEM education people, why is that a problem?
Number one, as you already stated in our rebuttals, there's obviously an influx of technicians in Asia, because obviously we see that actually the top leading countries are actually Asian countries. And second of all, we also told you in our first subpoint that actually the technological development that you so want is being pursued by the harmonization of technology and human studies. And although you're disparaging liberal arts, this is actually decreasing from your own motives.
So you're saying that the social perception is the problem. Then what exactly is your policy? How are you going to change that social perception by increasing literature classes?
Of course, it's a very difficult task to solve social perception. Why? Because it's a very abstract concept. But we think as a responsible government, there should be a solution to try to change that in the long term. And that will include increasing classes, that will include increasing the quality of literature classes. And that means that we think that although that may not be a short-term solution, we think that in the long term, because we have a necessity to solve society, we think that should be done.
Speaking of a responsible government, from countries like Bangladesh or Vietnam, do you think that a blue ocean of philosophy is more important, or practical infrastructure and technicians or engineers are more important?
Mr. Madam Speakers, the opposition side simply does not seem to.
Thank you. Guys need prep time? No? Go ahead. Whenever you're ready.
May I begin?
Yes.
We told everyone numerous times that we agree with many of the benefits that liberal arts education brings us. What's important is that they did nothing to prove to us that we lack that liberal arts education in the status quo. Because their single problem analysis in the status quo, what they wanted to change and what they set out as a problem, was that too many people were going to liberal arts majors in public schools, right? Then, first of all, we believe that assertion itself is very wrong, and that you need some kind of basis to prove that the right society society and a justified society is a society in which everybody has a balanced proportion of majors in public schools, that there should be a 50-50 proportion of people who go to liberal arts majors and science and math majors. That's why they failed in the problem analysis in the first place. Now, I have 3 points to talk about. And the first point is about how they were wrong in their problem analysis in the first place. Because if they tried to argue that they wanted to put more emphasis on liberal arts education, they have to explain to us why there's a lack in that liberal arts education. There was no response at all to our statistics saying that Asia is actually doing a very good job in their liberal arts education. According to a PISA study, that many countries are actually doing a great job in critical reading, critical writing. Now we asked you, where is our problem analysis coming from? They say that problem comes from students not going to liberal arts education majors, and that is a forced choice. Now, the reason why these students go to liberal arts, don't go to liberal arts majors, but more go to math and science majors, is because there are more jobs open, more spaces open in universities, more educational opportunities, therefore, more job opportunities, and more contributions to the individual, and more contributions to the society. Now, we asked you, why is that wrong from the first place? Because we see that those influences does not directly say that that's a problem, that simply because there's an unbalance of more people going to liberal arts education does not lead to a problem. Now, second of all, we ask you, how can your model actually change the social perception? They say that they're a responsible government, but we don't believe a responsible government is a government that actually gives us an unfeasible solution. Because we say that if their policy isn't to force kids to go to liberal arts majors, they're doing nothing to the status quo, nothing to the social perception, and that's why their stance cannot stand to the status quo. Thank you.
I have 30 seconds back to
Today, ladies and gentlemen, you saw a very irresponsible opposition who simply looks at the school hours and says that we are balanced education and who could not prove any of the burdens today. Today, the opposition's burden was to prove the unique benefits, the unique tangible benefits of math and sciences. So what benefits did they talk about? First of all, they talked about creativity. But ladies and gentlemen, we believe that liberal arts do a better job in terms of improving creativity by reading books and by having discussions. Math and sciences have one answer and they have the standard of being right and wrong. But how about ethics? How about history? And how about literature, ladies and gentlemen? There is much more space and much more room for these students to share their opinions, because their opinions and their thinking abilities is what matters in these kinds of subjects. And second of all, they talked about skilled workers and how Asia is lacking these kinds of doctors and those kinds of technologies. But we ask you, Mr. and Madam Speaker, really, is Asia really lacking doctors and those kinds of digital technology? What does Samsung company do it right now in South Korea, and how is Japan doing? Now they talked about the Bangladesh and how these poor countries need to have skilled workers in their society. Now, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, fine, then do math and sciences education, but why not also emphasizing liberal arts education? We believe that the basis of such education should be the understanding of humans, and that is why we believe that we need balanced education by keeping more emphasis than the status quo. And also, we believe that the problem in Bangladesh and those kind of poor countries is not the problem with the education structure itself, but the problem with a stable government, ladies and gentlemen, and we believe that is pretty relevant to this debate. Then what was the proposition's burden? Our burden was to prove the clear problems, and we believe that we have done a successful job in terms of proving the problem analysis. So first of all, we talked about technological development, and the parallel example will be how biotechnology is sufficiently developing in the status quo while we do not have any concept about bioethics, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that there must be enough understanding of humans, and while we develop math and sciences, we believe that liberal arts should be emphasized as well. And also we talked about forced choices, and what they said was that then why is it wrong to have the best job? We believe that that perception is wrong, ladies and gentlemen. By having more classes and by changing the educational paradigm, we want these people to also consider liberal arts job as a best job, ladies and gentlemen, and that is the reason why we urge you to propose. Thank you.
For Grand Crossfire, do you guys need prep time? Nope. All right. You can sit, stand. You're free to choose. Stand. Okay. Ready? Go ahead. Now.
Okay, you told the crowd, our are there really a shortage in technicians and engineers? If you look at South Korea, there's Samsung. You look at Japan, there's a very high-tech industry. Well, thank you for bringing that up, because we have statistics showing that in Japan, there are actually a shortage in technicians and engineers. But excluding South Korea and Japan, there are probably 100 or so countries in Asia, and those countries actually lack engineers and technicians.
Then fine, let's say that there is a shortage in Japan, but why not then keeping more education in math and sciences, but also emphasizing liberal arts? You need to prove that for it.
You're talking about how ethics and literature and those liberal arts education is very important, but don't our teachers already have those classes and already teach us those educations anyway?
As we told you repeatedly today, Mr. and Madam Speakers, the debate of today is not about the number of school hours we teach at school. What we're talking about is the general atmosphere of society that emphasizes math and science over liberal arts without a clear justification. So may I ask a question now?
So why does that social perception, first of all, how does your policy solve that social perception? And secondly, why does it have to be solved by a school environment? Why not campaigns? Why not funding of other things? Why do we have to reduce science and math education in a school environment to solve that
We
problem?
get your point, but we believe in the long perspective, the reason why there is lacking social perception of liberal arts is because of the fact that in terms of especially college education, there are more majors being selected for math and sciences. So by having more classes, we want to raise the social awareness about liberal arts and how it is important in today's society.
The reason we have a social awareness that actually says that liberal arts education is not as important, because when you do a liberal education, you don't get as much jobs. The market demand requires more STEM education. That's why that social awareness is happening.
Mr. and Madam Speakers, we think that in society there are 74% of CEOs that actually want to hire liberal arts majors. Despite the fact, we think that there's a great discrepancy in the number of liberal arts majors. So there's obviously a miscommunication between the job market and the number of students who actually want to study math and sciences compared to liberal arts.
Okay,
Also, may I ask a question, please, now? Thank you. So we think that job selection should be a combination of various factors that include the job market, but also aptitude and all these factors. And we think in the status quo, there's a clear emphasis on only one aspect in that.
Okay, where is that basis in you saying that there's a clear emphasis in the status quo in our educational system, not the social perception, in the education, a more emphasis or more focus on math and science education? Because you're trying to change that education system, and saying that there's a problem in the society, and then saying that we're going to change something in school is not going to solve that problem.
Number one, we think that's very absurd for the opposition to say that the education and social perception is not related at all, when education is about increasing social awareness and increasing and influencing society's next future generation. And we also think, ladies and gentlemen, that it is a long-term solution, we say, because obviously there is a need to change social perception. And how else are you going to change the social perception except through education, in which we're talking about the students who are actually going to choose these kind of majors. And also, ladies and gentlemen, you still have not answered our question regarding why, because in this situation, even if students want to study liberal arts, there is a social perception that forces these students to choose one major because of career perspectives, and we think that's terribly absurd.
Thank you. I am hoping.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
So they accuse us of being an irresponsible government, but we don't believe that it is a responsible government to artificially intervene in a system with an artificial solution when, first of all, that goes against the necessity of aid in the first place, and secondly, it doesn't really solve that society problem anyway. So we think that essentially what Team Proposition is doing is trying to artificially make people believe into thinking that liberal arts is going to get you a better job, when actually we see that the market demand requires more STEM education. So today's debate came down to, so at the end of today's debate, the judges will be asking themselves 3 questions. First of all, is this increase of emphasis necessary in the first place? Now they told us, 2 major problems. First of all, there's a lack of emphasis right now, and secondly about the imbalance. First of all, they never proved to us why there's a lack in the first place. We told you that, first of all, we have equal school hours in public schools, but moreover, secondly, actually, according to a PISA 2012 report, actually, Asian students are excelling in critical reading and writing. So we don't really see there's a lack of such kind of liberal arts skills in the first place. And secondly, about the imbalance, they said that, there's an imbalance of major taking, but we already told you that it is natural and obvious and it is justified for people's actions and choices to reflect market demand so that they can get better opportunities in their life. The second major question was that even if we need more emphasis on liberal arts education, maybe, even if that is true, does it have to happen in a school environment? Because we told you over and over again, like science and math education, it is specific to the school environment. You can't learn advanced calculus all by yourself. However, when it comes to other things like reading books, you can do that on your own. And also for the social perception, you can solve that through funding or campaigns or such kind of other measures. Why does it have to happen in school by reducing science and math? So we don't think so. And the third major question is that even if all those questions go to their side, what is best for Asia? And can we reduce STEM education? Because first of all, we said it is necessary for individual development, but secondly, more importantly, we told you that there's a shortage of STEM workers in the status quo. In Japan and India, even in those nations, but also in developing nations, they need industrialization. They need actual practical development with technicians and engineers. They don't need philosophy and literature right now. We think that the absolute necessity for these Asian nations actually come for STEM education, and that should be prioritized. And that's exactly why you'll be signing opposition ballots.
So, final focus speech.
Prep time, please.
5
Prep time, please.
How much? Rest of it? May please proceed to your final focus speech. Yes, go ahead.
So as a responsible government today, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to have an artificial intervention. We think artificial intervention is necessary when society is in a wrong state. And we think that because the government, the opposition side has a major flaw in their case, we take it to be home today. Their major flaw is the misanalysis of the status quo. And we told you repeatedly, ladies and gentlemen, that the variety of liberal arts majors in colleges is continuously decreasing. Also, we told you about the forced choices of these students, that even though job selection should be a consideration of various factors, only one factor is being emphasized, and that being career and money. And we think that is greatly restricting the freedom of these students to pursue what they want to do in the future. Also, ladies and gentlemen, we talked about technology plus human studies, that how the harmonization of these two studies is the only way to actually provide more technological development in the future, and they have not fully responded to that point. Now, compared to that, ladies and gentlemen, the opposition side simply said today that status quo is fine. Talk about how we're good at liberal arts, but based on test results and school hours. Now, but number one, ladies and gentlemen, that is a result of test-oriented culture, which these students are very highly trained to actually be good at and excel at test results. And secondly, well, we also talked about how it's not about school hours today, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about social perception. And how exactly is our resolution going to solve this problem? We're very sure of that. Why? Because in the long term, we're going to be able to change these students' mindsets in the future through education. And in any social problem, ladies and gentlemen, we have always used education as a method to change these students' perceptions. And we think that because they simply misanalyze the status quo, because they simply do not understand the problem of the status quo, which is liberal arts majors are not being able to give them the free choice to actually pursue the career they want in today's society, we think that it's unjustified for the opposition side to take your ballots today, Mr. and Madam Speakers, and that is why we're so proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, let's give our high school public forum debaters a round of applause. With that actually concludes all the events we have for you today. We are going to take a quick 10-minute break while we tally up the results, and we will proceed right on to the awards ceremony. Okay, have a great break. Please be back in your seats at the very latest by 4:45.